Food for Thought with Professor David Bitte.
A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's another episode of Food for Thought with Professor Ndete. Now today, we want to kick off a brand new series. We want to talk about what is commonly known as OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, to understand what it is, how it presents itself, and what we need to know about it. Professor Ndete, good to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Today I managed to come to your office.
Thank you very much. You're most welcome.
Your office is our studio.
Thank you. Yes, I can see that.
Yes. So, obsessive compulsive disorder, what is it?
Well, this is a very common condition to start with. I think more common than people appreciate, because what people hear of are those extreme cases, and we will have an opportunity to talk about those extreme cases. But if you look at the word, it has two words. I mean, the term has got two words. It's what we call obsessive. And when we are talking about obsessive, basically we are talking about our minds, our thoughts, what is going on in our minds.
Yeah.
And this may not find itself expression in terms of what we do, in terms of activities. Then the word compulsive implies that whatever is going on in our minds actually finds expression in some activities. And it's when we see these activities that we realize that there's a problem.
Yeah.
A person who has just got obsessive thoughts, they may struggle with these thoughts for a long time. And we never get to know, or other people, or even family members never get to know what is going on.
Because they're not being expressed
They are
yet.
not being expressed as yet.
Okay.
And they may torture those people tremendously.
Wow.
I do remember a case of a young dad who had this condition, presenting male only with obsessions. And in his mind, all that was going in his mind was to strike his young son on the head and kill him. And these thoughts kept on coming to his mind all the time. He didn't want to tell his wife. He didn't want to tell anybody because they would think that he is crazy. So all he would do is that the thought of killing his son was outrageous. So the only way he could cope with this situation without telling anybody was to stay away.
Stay away from his son.
Stay away from the son. And people couldn't quite understand why he was doing this.
Yeah.
And he thought that the safest way is to stay away from the son, because every time he was near us, got closer to the son, this is what he went through. And of course, if he told his wife what was going through, her reaction would be, "Oh, you can't do that," and then run away with the child.
Yes.
So there are people who have these thoughts. They can even have mental images of them doing terrible things. And so far, up to this point, these things are kept to themselves and in their minds, but they can be torturing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So actually, this is something that begins in the mind, because for many of us, when we hear OCD, one of the pictures that comes to mind is people who are always washing their hands. Even though in this season of COVID, all of us are washing their hands.
Yeah, like I have my sanitizer here. No, that is not obsessive compulsive disorder. That is normal behavior. And if you did do that yourself, or I didn't do that in my office, then it will be abnormal.
Very true.
You expect to sanitize yourself, and that's
true.
perfectly normal. So it is these things that are completely abnormal, and they do know, they realize at the back of their minds that these thoughts are normal. What is going through their minds is abnormal. At least they know that it is abnormal.
So that's where the struggle is.
That's where the struggle is.
And they know they're abnormal.
They know what they are doing is abnormal. Or what they are thinking is abnormal. And it's so abnormal that they don't want to share it with other people.
Okay.
And they keep on struggling with that condition. And no wonder they can become very depressed. And the people don't know what is happening. But I think you get to learn that when you see some of these things and you start talking to people, you're able to pick some of these things very, very easily in the clinical situation. And then you start talking about these things. Like, for example, this young man who was running away from his son, he didn't tell anybody until when he talked to us and said, well, I'm scared of staying next to my son. And then it clicked. And then we start talking about it.
You know, Professor, I'm just thinking like a pastor. If somebody came to me and they tell me that they are always having these thoughts, especially like the example you've given, you know, I'm always having these thoughts of killing my son. The first thing I would think of is, I think you're demon possessed.
Yes, unfortunately, that is a very common interpretation. And as I have said in other interactions, in the interviews in the past, you see, whenever there is a phenomenon, whenever something is happening, we always try to make sense of what is happening. We try to explain in our own minds, even using our cultures, using our religion, what is really happening. So a pastor like you, if you have that kind of story, the most immediate reaction is that you are demon possessed. I do not blame you. Because that is the only explanatory model that you have to explain this kind of behavior. And that is all over the world. It's not just because you are a pastor in Kenya. It's all over the world. That is the only explanatory model you have. Or if it's not a pastor and say you went to see somebody else, maybe a traditional healer, you have been bewitched.
Exactly.
And that is the starting point. So you don't get into arguments. I'm not going to get into argument with you on this issue. Neither am I going to get into argument with a traditional person on this. Because that's the only way they know to explain these things. But for me, I have a different explanatory model.
Exactly.
And that is a medical model where we think we understand what is happening in the brain. And if I sit with you and say, Pastor, I understand the way you are explaining this, or you understand this, I perfectly understand that. But there is also a different explanatory model. People understand. They say, oh yes, I did not know about this. And this is where, when we don't understand what is going on, and our explanatory model does not seem to explain everything, that's when we begin to stigmatize things because we do not understand. And many people have been talking about, without digressing, many people have been talking about stigma towards mental illness. I believe the reason why we have this stigma towards mental illness, in this particular case, obsessive compulsive disorder, is because they really don't quite understand what is going on. For example, how can you explain a person who says that he's hearing voices, and for you is hearing those voices for you, and yet you can't see people around that person, and people get into fights about this condition, this phenomena. At the moment you understand what's going on from a different explanatory model, then you don't stigmatize that condition.
Very true.
You know it is a medical condition. It cannot happen to anybody. Nobody is immune to or from these conditions. Today is me, tomorrow is you, another time is so and so.
Well, that's all the time we have today for Food for Thought with Professor Ndete. Thank you so much for tuning in. We haven't quite finished this discussion on OCD, so ensure you hook up with us again next week as we continue to build on this discussion. Have yourselves a great day.